Hi! That's usually how I start off all my videos. I've never done this before in my life, so I really don't know how exactly this is meant to go.
Just talk. It'll be great.
Why don't you introduce yourself to the channel, to me?
My name is Devon Giehl. I've been at Wonderstorm since kind of the very beginning of it due to a sort of cascade of life circumstances, but it meant that I had the sort of luck. It felt kind of dangerous and scary at the time since it was a tiny startup, but like in the long run it was an extremely lucky break for me that I got to be there from sort of the very true infancy of the company and the Dragon Prince. So for the first 3 seasons I was a producer and staff writer on the show, and for season 4 onward at the company I've been lead writer, which means I do a little bit more heavy lifting on script editing and whatnot. And I also do a lot of behind-the-scenes development stuff for other products and theoretical shows, presuming that anything in any industry is ever allowed to get made again. I'm sorry, that's really cynical, but it's a weird time in animation and Hollywood.
So you've been here since the start?
Yeah. I think that was I want to say 2015. I think.
Yeah, I can't.
Which is wild. That feels like 100 years ago.
It does.
Dragon Prince, I think, was 2018 or 19.
That's where your time skip really made everything feel longer. I felt like it's like I can't believe the show's still going on like after so long.
Not me neither. And it doesn't feel like that long at the same time. Like it feels, and I mean like the pandemic and whatever made time like feel even more fake because
it did. Yeah, right.
we developed so much of the back half of, not the back half, but Mystery of Aaravos, the newer seasons during the pandemic, and it all felt it was kind of a crazy blur. So it's been wild, but yeah, I've been here a long time.
So you're mentioning Mystery of Aaravos. What were your thoughts on the release of season 5? What was your initial response to how people were giving positive feedback and all that stuff for the season?
I was really happy that it seems to be overall well received because it's one of my favorite seasons. I feel like it has a lot of stuff that I personally enjoyed working on in it. I think it's a more character-driven season overall.
I agree.
Season 4 had a lot of setup, and we call them resets, like in on the team and sort of like in writing circles, like a quote reset is sort of like a way that you sort of pull back the story and start from a new beginning, even though it's like a familiar cast. It's it's sort of like okay, we're starting a brand new sort of book, and so you establish a status quo, you establish the change in the status quo, you do all these sort of like basic writing maneuvers, and sometimes that feels really like hard and difficult, especially when you're doing a time skip, and so there's a lot of like execution difficulties with some of that thankfully season 5 we kind of just got to get back to the familiarity of the characters and their relationships and let them sort of like finally carry the story again.
Yeah, I definitely felt that season 5 was a lot more relationship driven, like in terms of how the characters interacted again. It felt a lot more familiar than season 4 did, and I think it's just because we're all getting used to the characters again. Lots of people were like, oh my gosh, Rayla looks so different now and all that stuff. And Callum has like crazy spiky hair now. It's like, we're all getting.
He's a teenager. He's got bedhead.
Yeah, he's got a constant bedhead. Okay, I'm using that.
Yeah. The longer you work on something, the easier it is to sort of like write to it. And season 4 felt very much like I said, a reset where we had to write to the entire concept of the 2-year time skip, which had its challenges, and I could talk a lot about like how I feel about the execution of it, but I've done that a lot in other places, so I'm not going to do that here.
Fair enough.
But yeah, season 5, I think I've made it really clear everywhere I've been allowed to talk about it how much I like Finnegrin as a sort of like minor arc villain that we got to do.
Finnegrin.
We don't really get to do that very often. We don't get like minor villains here and there with 9 episodes, so it was kind of like a fun little like it felt sort of like we were cheating with our 9-episode format.
Yeah, like
get to do a little mini arc.
Whenever I first saw Karim, I kind of thought he was gonna be one of those 9-episode villains, but it turns out he's not. So it's really nice to see Finnegrin be one of those, and it's really interesting how you wrote Finnegrin. Were you responsible for creating Finnegrin as a character?
So like literally everything in the show is a group effort. There's very rarely a time in which like one person is specifically responsible for the entirety of a thing, because the way that the team operates is it's a writer's room. So you will pitch things, you know, at a very extremely basic level. And so even though I would say like pirate arc sort of stemmed from a pitch that me and Ian had, which was just like, if they can't take Zubeia, they're gonna have to go find a boat. And what if they went to a sort of like pirate haven, like a hive of scum and villainy, that type of setting? Just how we sort of came up with Scumport. Yeah, literally Tortuga came up in the conversation. And the way a writer's room works is that you sort of pitch something with absolutely zero like attached ideas to it just yet, and you sort of like go back and forth with the team and see what builds and see what sort of like doesn't quite fit. But Finnegan existed kind of as like a piece of that at first. It was, like we developed episode 6 or as like a little heist at first, because we were like, they're gonna go to this pirate town and they're gonna like steal these cute little baitlings from a pirate lord, and it's gonna be this fun little one-off episode that's sort of like a little bit of a break from heavy sort of plot stuff before we get back to that. And then we kind of got really attached to it and decided we wanted to spend 2 more episodes doing that. So that's kind of how that came about. And again, like Finnegan, like I don't even remember who said like, and there's a crime boss on the island. It was just sort of like the room sort of naturally gravitated around the idea that of course there's sort of like a Tony Soprano of the Deadwood was actually the reference, the show Deadwood, which is why Deadwood is called Deadwood, to kind of honor that particular reference. But it was Al Swearingen was actually the character reference for Finnegan from the beginning, and that was from Aaron. So again, like it's all extremely collaborative. So the only time I typically credit like one person with an idea is if it's just like so singular in the room that clearly someone spun gold from nothing. Or specific lines, like writers will, even if on a script or on an episode, there'll be like an overall writer, like it'll be credited to me and Ian. Right. Very often there will be lines in the script that come from other writers, because we all sit there and look at the script on the screen and edit it and make it what it is.
Yeah, so speaking of that,
that's it.
As far as I know, you wrote episodes 3, 6, and 8 for this season, if I'm correct about that, or did you just write 3 and 8?
3, 6, and 8. I think that's right.
6 and 8. So, how did that go about? How does it feel being in charge of writing an entire episode like that?
I guess I'll just talk about the process a little more. Again, the way that the room works is there'll be a brainstorm phase where we literally sort of just like, what do we want to happen this season? And, for season 5, it was very much just like, we want the characters to go from where we left them, which was Umbrator, to the Sea of the Cast Out, where they find the prison and the pearl, and we sort of like do that big reveal. And it's so big picture. And then so you're looking at sort of like a blank, what do you call it, corkboard, and we'll put up little cards that are 1 through 9, and you sort of start just like taking stabs at where you think like certain plot beats might happen. So I think we had for the beginning, we had, Callum and Rayla go off on their little, like, side quest to, link up with the Sunfire Elf plot. Yep. Then we had, like, episode 4. We think this is the one where they go to the bookery in Luxoria. And that's really it. Like, you don't really fully flesh out an episode until much, much later in the process. And so you start throwing all those things on there. A rough shape of the season takes form. Don't quite yet realize how difficult facing any of it will be until you're in the nitty-gritty. So when you're like, oh, it's perfect, it's on the board, it looks so cool, you will inevitably suffer later, no matter what. There's no way around it. Because every idea that's on like a little note card either expands or contracts massively when you get into the actual breaking of the episode. Then you go sort of like, you zero in on like the first episode, and we're like, what happens here? We've sort of figured out where the beginning and the end are. You go through ruthlessly, and we do what's called a pitch out, which is we take another corkboard and we do act 1, 2, and 3. And we sort of scene by scene break down exactly what's going to be in the episode. And Aaron and Justin, as showrunners, are so thorough about this part of the process that by the time you, as a writer, are assigned an episode, you are so well equipped with exactly the beats of what's going to be in, the first draft is your outline. Again, like the process is so front loaded that by the time you are, quote, assigned your script, it's not like you're generating stuff from nothing. It's not like I spun an
got the whole
entire
plan going
episode
and-
from. Yeah, you've got really, I don't want to say rigid because it makes it sound like you're like held at gunpoint with your script expectations, but it's you know what the story you're telling is and exactly sort of like what the emotional beat should feel like, what each act break is. You're so set up for success, and I think it's like really strong part of the way Aaron runs the team, and it makes my job easier. So, but yes, being in charge of an episode in this show is really great because you're
like
so
taking everyone's
supported.
idea,
Yeah.
taking everyone's idea, putting it all together into one big thing.
Yeah, you have the entire team's like input, and you're utilizing everybody's strengths. Like at the time for season 5, Neil Kapatai was still on staff, and he since has left to go on to work on other shows, and it was cordial. Don't worry, we love Neil. Like I always shout him out as like he comes up with some of the funniest stuff that ends up on the show. So even if he's not the writer on the specific script, a lot of the funny stuff in the script will have come from him. So when you're like, I'm the assigned writer, I'm getting to like sort of like utilize the entire team's various strengths and get something stronger as a result. So I love to write like heavy drama, and I'm not that funny. So like people like Neil and Ian, my husband and writing partner Ian Hendry, are way funnier than me. So my scripts get to be funny because they exist, and so it's just great.
Oh,
It's a really
cool,
good
actually, yeah.
team's great. Does that answer your question? I know there's like
It
a
does,
long
yep,
like
that does, that's
description of how the writing team functions.
Let's hear your thoughts on Rayllum.
So there's, I don't know, the story that we've said about Callum and Rayla as a romantic pair is that we actually didn't plan it from the beginning of the show.
Yeah, I heard that. That was really weird, considering some of the ways they would look at each other in like the first season. I was like,
I think
are you
like
guys
part of it is
sure?
that part of it is that the medium of animation is so infinitely collaborative that we as writers, we write the script and we hand it off to a team of hundreds of board artists that sort of like their impression of the characters into their part of the process, and then animators go further and you get their like sort of takes on the intimate facial features of all the characters as they animate the acting. I think like people often credit writers with that, where they're like, that look that the character, like that must have been in the script, and I'll often be like, super wasn't in the script, man.
Oh,
Like
really?
the artists are just really, really good at their jobs. Aaron often refers to scripts as sort of like a blueprint that artists take and sort of like build from.
Oh, that makes
So
sense.
I think part of what happened with Rayla and Callum is that how the art sort of like developed organically influenced us as writers, and we started to sort of see the chemistry, and like obviously the voice actors Jack and Paula are incredibly talented, and there was something there that we didn't particularly insert ourselves, and it was fun to sort of take it and run with it because it was inspiring, like
Yeah, that's really cool, actually.
so I really like that it happened that way because like a really big fan of romance, and I like writing romance, and I think like it felt organic to the characters because like we hadn't painstakingly sort of like stitched it together on purpose. So it's kind of like a happy accident.
Yeah, so it's one of the
so
best happy accidents
really love-
I think the show's had.
I know everybody. That's like 99% of what I see is people talking about Rayllum, and I'm like, cool. Later seasons, it's been fun for me as like a grown-up writer in a marriage. Nobody likes to hear this. That we've sort of like challenged their relationship a bit and made it a little bit more difficult, and they're growing as people, and they're still extremely close, and they still care about each other really deeply, but circumstances have made it.
Yeah, like they're not together yet, but they might be soon, like that type of thing. Like
yeah, and I think like
they have a bigger thing to focus on, but they're still really close. They'll do anything for each other, as we've seen, and it's one of the things I love about them. They seem really natural. Like they seem like they would exist in real life. They have cultural differences that sort of split them apart in Through the Moon and all that stuff. Like Rayla, like I wrote a sort of like a character analysis. I figured that Rayla left Callum behind out of love because that's what she was taught to do by Renan and Athari. It's like Renan would always go off on adventures and Athari would always stay home, and so Rayla figured that she could go off hunting for Viren to protect Callum. But Callum had the example of Sarai, who accompanied Harrow instead and died at his side. And that was the way Callum learned to express his love, I guess, and that's what made him so upset. about her departure.
Well, first I want to say that I think that's a really cool analysis that I haven't heard described exactly that way before, and makes me really happy that, you know, viewers and fans kind of see almost more than we see sometimes in things, because I was like, yeah, I think about Rayla a lot because I love her. I think you're right that her upbringing influences the way she behaves quite a bit. I think it is a question that the show asks the audience is like, do you think this is good? Do you think like this level of self-sacrifice is in fact heroic, or is it, you know, is it hurting her? Is it hurting others? Like, how much of it is heroic versus how much of it is too far? Like, how much, you know, blood and self-sacrifice does she sort of have to take onto herself to be a functional person and feel satisfied with who she is in the world? And I think that's really hard for her, and there's no like really easy answer. I sort of like struggle when I see sort of like, I don't want to say like harsh analysis of her, where it's like she's just so, you know, she keeps making all these mistakes and she's mean.
She's a person.
I
Everyone
really
makes mistakes. It's like that's what I
know.
do.
I kind of want to say like, so you've never like totally screwed something up and face planted hard and still had somebody care about you at the end. I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about that. Through the Moon actually ended up being some people's favorite piece of Dragon Prince media, which you can't really predict for. And I think that's part of what you were saying is Rayllum and people enjoying that particular relationship is such a strong part of the fan experience. That, of course, like I think there was like a Twitter poll where people were like, "What's your favorite Dragon Prince episode?" And Through the Moon either won or almost won, and I'm like, it's not even an episode. Which cracked me up and also made me, you know, you reflect on it and you think like, wow, that Insight is 2020, like that story ended up with so much more value and weight and attachment to it than could have really predicted at the time. And I don't really say that as an excuse. It's just something that happens when you like make stuff and you're on a production timeline. There's very little you can predict about like what people will care about the most, no matter how much you try. I'm often wrong. I think people will care about the wrong things, and you know, I don't know. But yeah, I think Through the Moon is incredibly well executed, and that has made it harder for us to sort of like build the story continuously out of it because we had done it as a graphic novel, which is, you know, a good problem to have, but also a challenge. So
yeah, and I do like
sort
how,
of like,
I do like how you've been playing off of it, like the whole Callum being upset when she got back. Like, I thought that was handled really well. Lots of people say he was too harsh, but I think it was justified, besides the Moon Opal scene. But, like, all of it I thought was very natural, very real, and how Callum is now a lot more forgiving of her. I think that's also very Callum. It seems like everything feels in character with them regarding that.
Yeah. My take as again, it lives on its own. People are totally allowed to have their own interpretations on it. I don't want to overstep. The way that I've always sort of thought about it is Callum's reaction is harsh because he's young and because he's hurt and because he really does care so much and he really wanted to be a participant in what she was doing. And she had the complete opposite take where she thought he'd, you know, like you said, the Moonshadow culture thing, like, I'm doing this out of love for you. I'm doing this because I have to go get this dude for, you know, this lurking specter in my imagination. I have to go make sure that it's done. I have to make sure that this can't like rear up and haunt us again. The main turning point to me is the literal like tail end of season 4 where Callum hugs her and says, "So glad you came back." Which to me, and I don't know that it perfectly plays this way, and especially because it's just like, and then you have to wait a whole another season to see the direct continuation of it. But that moment to me is where he sort of decides to
let down those walls, so to speak.
Let his walls back down and to sort of like say the thing he should have said. When I say should have said, I'm not like judging him as a person. I'm not like, obviously, if it were me, I would have done this perfectly from moment one. But should have said in his own heart, like he's like, I should have said from moment one, "So glad you came back." Like that's the actual most important thing to him. Like, which doesn't invalidate all the other ways he feels. It is the thing that is at the core of his, you know, feelings is he's back in my life, care about her both as a friend and possibly more. And that's ultimately what's valuable to him. And how he treats her through season 5 is a reflection of that exact turn.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Again,
yeah.
at least that's my interpretation of it as we wrote it, and sort of like personal thought behind the way we shaped it.
When I first saw it, I was like, I feel like Callum was just really confused, and that anger, and the anger sort of stemmed from that confusion. Like she, like on top of leaving, she also lied to him. Like she said, "You can come with me," and then in the middle of the night, she left. Do you think that would have something to do with his anger more than her leaving?
See, people debate this a lot, so this is another one that I'm kind of like hesitant to weigh in on. But to me, lie was a little bit less importance than her overall absence. To me, that when you love somebody very, very much, those sort of like details of a conflict you have with them tend to become less important when you care about them so much. I'm trying to say this so delicately because I know that like Rayllum fans are going to be like mad if I say too much about like the lie. Again, to me, the act of forgiveness and the act of moving on from the hurt is rooted so much more in that basic like care about you and I want you in my life, less than the sort of like the details of what was and wasn't a lie. Again, that's just my take. That's just my sort of like
Fair
opinion
enough,
on what matters to Callum. I think like there's an element of him that just doesn't want her to hurt herself, you know, like I think he can tell in some way that action he took what she felt was right and is a part of her and a reflection of who she is, and that's a person that he cares about very deeply. And so the wound becomes less of a sort of like you betrayed me and hurt me, and more of a like person whose qualities I care for, like the sum of her, you know, some of her as a person led her to do this thing which did hurt me, but I understand her, you know. Anyway, there's a lot of like inner Callum brain that I probably have spent too much thinking of.
Let's shift gears a little bit. How do you feel about the show taking a much darker turn, starting off with Finnegrin's Wake?
I like it. Again,
we're done. Okay, good.
No, it lets me do what I'm better at, I think, in the long run. I don't want to say like none of it is done because we feel like being meaner to the characters. Just we wake up and we're like, today I think the series should get more dark. I think the first 3 seasons of The Dragon Prince were this very hopeful, positive, even though grounded, I hope. They had this sort of overall thematic tone of peace is possible, even in the great, you know, in the face of great adversity, and even when you're the smallest possible person in the world. The wake of an incredible history of conflict, like you can still make changes that result in a more peaceful, better world. It's very like rah rah hurrah. The show's honestly pretty preachy about it sometimes, better and worse. I think the mystery of Aaravos is a little bit of a challenge to that, and I think like to me it follows the arc of like characters' ages, or the like the way that you start to see the world when you're between the ages of 14 and 20, which is sort of like the age range of the main cast, except Ezran. Ezran is mystery age because we can never get it right. But he's like 12, I don't know. But
he's around that, yeah.
He's kid, but to me, yeah, the themes in Mystery of Aaravos are about maintaining that peace, like, and how that's honestly harder than like winning the one good thing you did and making it matter in the long run is an act of persistence and resilience that it's hard to maintain. And I think we'll see this, I hope, play in later seasons, the 2 upcoming seasons, where it wears on you. Like, it is hard to carry that much like ho goodness in you, and the world is like pretty hell-bent on not letting you maintain that sort of identity, you know, that good heart in your chest. And I think like when you grow up, when you're, you know, 14, you're very opinionated on how to be a perfect good person, and then when you're 18, you're a little less sure, and then when you're in your mid-20s, you don't super don't know anymore. It's over. I think that's such a natural course of that part of life that I think our attempt in Mystery of Aaravos is sort of to explore that transition from, some of your most formative years attempting to be good versus having to live like that for the rest of your life is kind of like one of the baselines of the human experience to me, and it's so hard. You will just lose pieces of yourself along the way, no matter your best intentions. And so I think that's why the later seasons have a darker tone, is because like unavoidably that's the way life will treat you. And we wanted that to be the mix of how our characters interact with the world of Zadia. Also, I just think it's cool when characters get tortured off screen. No, I'm just kidding. I don't. Maybe I do a little, but
if you see my reaction video, I may or may not have, I had to leave the room. Anyways, we don't talk about that.
I'm so sorry. I genuinely was like, why
did
Netflix let us get away with this?
Help them unlock the Ocean Arcanum. So. One thing I did want to talk about is there's one spot that we saw at the very end of episode 8 and at the start of episode 9, the sculpture of Aaravos and the Merciful One. What's that all about?
I think it's funny because I saw a lot of people being like, well, why did nobody think the prison was here? Because these statues are here. It's like the world's greatest. This is an important location
it's like a
signifier.
Giant sign.
And I will say that like the small history of that is at the end of 8, when Nyx says, "Look, it's the Sea of the Cast Out." As written, it was just like she gestures over there, and we're like, okay, so what is she? How do we make this moment feel like she's actually doing a reveal, right? And we're like, well, there's probably some sort of like thing that is the entrance to the Sea of the Cast Out and makes it a known location.
I think the part that confused me is like she also mentioned treasure in the same sentence, and I kind of thought on my first watch that she was gesturing to where the treasure was, not where the sea entrance was, if that makes sense.
That line goes by so quick, and it covers like so much plot that I totally understand. It's just one of those like, we have a minute and a half left in the episode, like we have to squeeze in a lot of information to move on. But the idea is she told Finnegrin we were going to the Sea of the Cast Out in pursuit of a treasure, which is why he kept up the course. There is no treasure, except I guess you could call the prison a treasure. She does this little lie to sort of like help, even though she's saving her own skin in the process. It's Nyx.
Classic Nyx. Mm-hmm.
It's another one of my favorites. I just love that she.
Yeah, I love her so much.
wants the like praise for doing most Ray deed. Anyway, that's a side thing. But the idea is she gestures, and in the actual moment of storytelling, when she says right there, you just need the camera to look at something meaningful and not like the coast.
It's like, oh yeah.
So we're like, so what's there? And we have some backstory. We know in our hearts as the writing team a more extended backstory of what the Sea of the Cast Out is. And I will say that those statues... Well, the other thing that happened is that we were like, make it kind of like the Lord of the Rings cool statue entrance.
Yes,
and then Bardell, the animation studio, was like, okay. And they took it to like 12, not even 11. They took the art to so beautiful and over the top that we were like, well, is that what we imagined? Not exactly, but it's so cool that like, why would we stop them? So it's again sort of like the effect of collaboration is had a small idea, it became a big idea, out of like a tiny script necessity too. Ultimately, it works with the backstory because that event predates Aaravos' imprisonment. So the statues I think have been there for a really, really long time, and don't have anything to do with his prison, really. Have to do with something else. I'm trying not to say too much. Once everybody sees the chronological order of events, it will make a bit more sense that like people would see those statues and not necessarily think, well, of course this is where Aaravos was imprisoned. It's sort of would almost be the opposite. It's the of course it wouldn't be here. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons that I think in the moment of season 5, it was just like, well, why did nobody check here? Full story will be a little bit more clear. And also it just looks cool, so sometimes things are just allowed to look cool.
I'm going to start asking you some personal questions that I had about sort of the writing.
Oh no.
So my first one was, did Rayla's birthday happen in between seasons?
People always ask about birthdays, and it's really hard because, well, I think that the birthdays are really cool and a fun thing for fans to speculate on. Very rarely, and I get this is all based, very rarely does it kind of fit into the course of an episode to have a character's birthday mentioned. The exception, obviously, is Callum's birthday, but the whole plot and theme of that episode sort of centered around that as a major event that wasn't just like, it's Callum's birthday. It was related to a billion other things going on. It's really hard to figure out how to meaningfully incorporate character's birthday into like the course of a episode or a season without huge outside justification. If you want birthday episodes, you gotta have like 22 episodes per season, man.
So, like,
sorry.
The reason I asked that is because I remember, I think, I don't know who did this, but somebody calculated that season 4 spanned 10 days, I think. And I tried to guess that that season 5 spanned 9. So if Rayla's birthday is like 2 weeks after Callum's, I kind of figured that meant it happened in between season 4 and 5, and that's why we didn't see it. But
probably, so we actually do have a document somewhere that we attempt to track do it with the moon. Somebody said we ruined in season 5, which they're probably right because it's really hard to track. But the phases of the moon are often sort of like meant to be time passing. In total, seasons 4 to 5 are 30 days because of Viren's timeline.
Yep.
And there are places sort of built in where you can't quite tell how much time has passed, and between season 4 and 5 is one of those because they do go back to Katalis briefly. They regroup. Like at some point, someone says, "We're gonna go get the thing." I forgot what we even called it. The
Siren Stone.
Siren Stone.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I work on this show. We're gonna go get the Siren Stone. Okay, let's split up. Like, you wait here. Like, Children's gonna go do this thing. Obviously, some amount of time does exist in that gap. So you're probably right, but to verify, I would have to dig up this point quite ancient spreadsheet. It's possible. I think that's like realm of fan content opens that up for anybody to explore, and that's kind of why I like fan content so much, or that I'm technically not allowed to like read it and whatnot, but I love when there's missing scenes or gaps in the storytelling that like most creative and involved of our fans often just like project something into that space, and that's part of what makes like media really beautiful to me, is you tell yourself a story alongside the story that you are being told, and that's kind of where magic exists to me. Is so if there are folks who are really invested in this idea of Rayla having had a birthday in between seasons, then I like yes, that's awesome. Please like take that and incorporate it into your personal interpretation of the entire thing. And what do you think that looked like? Like write a fan fiction, or just like tell yourself a story about it. Like make it meaningful for you. Yeah.
I like that answer a lot, actually.
Probably it was between seasons. You're probably right.
Can you tell us a bit how Pharos survived season 3, or will we hear more about that in the future?
You'll never get like a specific. Here's exactly an episode about Pharos standing up during the Luxoria tragedy and being like, I should have been dead, but I'm not. But he got out somehow. I think like that's another one of those quote, keep saying missing scenes. Like it's a thing we will not necessarily answer directly, but the twist and the surprise of him being alive is part of what's interesting about it. Or it is the point, I guess. Like the actual story is, hey, this guy lived? Interesting, right? It has less to do with the exact circumstances of how he lived, and more about the story is he shows up, he's still alive, he presents himself as a follower of Kareem. A little sketch, huh?
And speaking
that's
of
about
sketches,
all I can say.
Speaking of sketches, we saw one that showed he does still have the bite mark from the little bug pal from Aaravos.
That's weird.
So my question about that was, why didn't Sol Regem smell death on Pharos?
And I hate these technical questions so much. If he did, first of all, there's nothing that says he didn't.
Fair.
He's too depressed to care. And if he didn't, I would say it's probably because it doesn't register in the same way that something like Callum having freshly done dark magic does. But But again, I'm super the worst possible writer on the team to answer the sort of like magical technicality questions, because I'm always like, it's magic. But truthfully, I think there's probably some. I can't decide. I genuinely can't decide if like. I think it's perfectly plausible that Rex is just like, do not care. I'm so at the end of my,
It's like
giving a shit
grumpy
quota.
Old, grumpy old grandpa.
Yeah, like he got his butt kicked by like 2 children getting into Zadia, and that was sort of like the last straw in his mental health, and he's over it now. And he's in a cave and he's sad, and so he's not going to get like on his horse again about smell of death right away. But I honestly like that. I think that's a perfectly okay reason. But I can also buy that it's a subtle magic. It's not quite as strong as something like I said, like Callum, full of episodes ago, having done dark magic like yesterday. So it's one of those things. You just gotta let it some explanation for you.
Okay.
I hope.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to some fan questions. Gotta do a little advert here. Brought to you by my fan server, the Cov Club, link in the description. I asked my server to give me a whole bunch of questions for you, and I chose the ones that I thought would be the most interesting. But the first one, and this is one that might be potentially inappropriate. Aaron did something on Twitter. He claimed that the inn only had 1 bed. What happened in that inn?
Well, Aaron's being hilarious. It's another. He's doing the exact same thing that I keep doing with being like, that sure is a missing scene. You're correct. Like, what do you think happened?
Oh,
but
God.
He's playing around with fanfic tropes. I think if you want to believe there was only 1 broken bed, then you can write whatever you want about that, and I'm not allowed to read it. So the actual answer, which is again not canon anymore, but I believe that was one of Neil's scripts, and there was actually an extended scene at the inn that was just like a D&D joke, and which is why it got cut, because it's just like, why would we have time to do this extended D&D joke? But the idea was go into the inn. I'm trying to remember, it was a long time ago, but they go into the inn and basically like they're immediately accosted by a whole bunch of like mysterious strangers who have quests for them, and they have to keep turning them down because they're like, we already got a quest, and we go to Luxoria. Then there's like a mysterious Aragorn-y type dude in the corner who like
blows on his pipe or something.
Yeah, he's just like, he's that sort of like, oh, this is the D&D like main character guy, and he was supposed to sort of stand up and start accepting the quests. And I don't know, it was funnier in the script because Neil's very funny, but like the extended bit was they have just entered a D&D tavern and they are already main characters, so they don't need to do anyway. It's very, very silly, but lives in my heart as a funny bit. We never, oh my god, animation is so expensive. Why would we build the entire interior of an inn, several quest givers, an entire guy for like 4 shots of him accepting quests from innkeepers and whatnot? So wildly out of scope scene, very funny in the writer's room, did not make the cut. Now it's up to everybody's imagination. What happened in there? Archive of our own is right over there.
Right.
AO3 for it.
This question's from AC. He asks, what part of season 5 did you or any of the writers enjoy writing the most?
I liked writing the Sea Shanty.
Oh yes. I have a question about that for you later too.
Yeah, I had wanted to do that. I literally wanted to do that in season 2. I wanted Velos to have one. I just really like writing like silly little in-universe songs. Do it all the time if it weren't like actually extremely time-consuming and expensive to execute. And so there's all these wild rights and stuff about music, which means like it's not even on the soundtrack at the end of the day. Anyway, a lot of work. I finally got away with it, and I got to put a Sea Shanty into the show. So that felt like I finally was getting away with something silly that I'd wanted to do all along. I was so surprised it didn't get cut. It was such a good candidate for like there's so many things where you go through a script and you have to cut them down. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, there's no way this is ever making it. Like a whole minute and a half or so of, it's actually much less. It's like maybe 30 seconds
and
at
it
the
shows
end of
up
the
at
day.
the
But
end
like,
credits and everything like that.
yeah, it's so hard to justify in animation, like being that indulgent and doing sort of like an intro to an episode that feels that you usually just gotta get to it. You got 22 minutes, get to it. You know, it was a luxury, and I got away with it, and it makes me happy.
And speaking of that shanty, I'm going to actually ask this question now. This is from Azure Spider Queen. A growing fan theory is the sea shanty is in fact referring Aaravos. It stems from certain lyrics seeming to describe his underwater fate, a jailer, and the character having dark eyes as he does. Does the song refer to Aaravos?
It wasn't supposed to. It was actually supposed to refer to Finnegan, but it awesome to me that it's also accidentally about Aaravos. I could pretend, I'm sort of tempted to just be like, absolutely, it was totally intended to be about Aaravos all along because I'm a huge genius. But the funny thing is, it was supposed to be about Finnegan's backstory and his confrontation with Domina, his like refusal to bow or die to her oceany wrath, which makes it truly ironic that he doesn't. I guess like. I don't think we've released the full lyrics anywhere, but like in the end, despite the fact that his ship is destroyed and he's like, the elements are closing in all around him, like the water's freezing, dragging him under. And people ask about gills. It's a metaphor, and he can drown because it's a metaphor for just dying. It was about his story, which again,
That's really cool.
so happens to kind of line up nicely with Aaravos's. So I'm like delighted and tickled by it seeming smarter than it actually was. Fans are totally right. Like when you read it, I'm like, oh my god, it is kind of a really similar story. Only on purpose. I'm gonna pretend it was totally just great foresight and writing by me.
Perfect planning, yeah.
It wasn't. It's just like a cool accident again.
So this one comes from Kevvar, one of the mods on the main server. He asks, how does one break into writing for digital entertainment, whether for animated shows or video games?
Well, the first thing you got to do is go to college in 2007 through 11 when there's a giant budget crisis going on in California and all of the classes get cut. You get really mad. You graduate in 4 years with a basic English degree. And then you go to work for an intern at a video game company that just happens to get really big. Now I'm being really facetious, but it's sort of literally what happened to me is I actually went to college for screenwriting, and then all of the screenwriting courses at college I went to got either cut or massively impacted, which meant that I would have had to stay at college for like 5 to 8 years if I actually wanted to do that coursework. And I ain't got that kind of money, and my family didn't have that kind of money, so I was like, I'll just do an English degree and leave. My like massively sarcastic, cynical side is bleeding through here because I was like, you're gonna get a job somewhere, or just like go die. Again, I'm being so brutal, but no, it really at the time it felt just like, why did I just spend all this money on this education? Where the entire school system fell apart while I was paying for it. It was really bad. No, but so and then I got an internship at Riot, which was again hog wild at the time. It was a tiny company in a tiny office. Again, it wildly lucky. I got such kind of cosmic luck on the whole front. So I worked in video games for a while, specifically just because I was like, need a job, and got an internship at a company, and it just really worked out. My husband Ian is actually a much better example of actual sort of like meaningful process that people go through. That's typically work really, really hard. He spent several years working in South Carolina while applying to basically everything. All the while he was sharpening his skills on a computer science degree, which is way more useful than my writing degree. He can program, he can design, he can write, and developing that diversity of skills and being willing to sort of take jobs that fit multitude of those skill sets was how he got into video games. And he makes me really mad because it just so happens that he's also a really good writer just by accident. Like, he didn't go to school for that. I did. But he's really good. Very frustrating person. So for writing, harder for me to describe like how to get into animation writing because I did it so weird. I came through video games and got kind of lucky and happened to at the startup that and Justin were working on. But again, it circled back to that like screenwriting was ultimately what I really wanted to do all along. I don't know. I'm mostly just like telling my weird backstory and not being very helpful because I always struggle with these questions a lot.
That's fair.
It's gonna sound like I'm saying like just suck up to people in the industry, but I absolutely don't mean that. Networking is important. I'd say be very like willing to like listen and learn to people who describe the industry and its challenges and sort of like are open about how weird it is here and how often strange it can be. So be open-minded and open-hearted to engaging with a group of people who genuinely all like love what they do and love their work. The jobs are really hard. I think like people don't quite, they expect there's some degree of like, I just want to get in there and write a script, and I'm like, oh, that's the easy, simple part, and everything else is really, really, really difficult. Yeah, I don't know. That's so not helpful. I'm sorry. I'll do an entire other video about that. I promise.
Maybe Kevlar can have you on his podcast.
Yes, please. I promise I'll prepare for a question like that better.
Okay.
Or make Ian answer it, because again, I keep doing this because he's literally like 2 rooms over. He has a much more involved story about like engaging the industries and becoming cool and talented person he is.
So here's one that you actually have prepared for because I saw a tweet about it. What's your sort of I guess thoughts on Callum learning the Ocean Arcanum rather than Moon? And do you think there's a world where he could learn Moon? This may be potentially spoilery, but do you think there's a chance where he could learn Moon in the main series?
I'm gonna answer this in a way that's like not fun and more practical.
Okay.
Do you think it kind of makes some sense that he would gravitate towards the Moon Arcanum from like a really basic sort of like thought experiment? But Moon thematically is very special to Rayla, her character, and my thought as a writer is I actually don't want Callum to sort of tread on that thematic territory. I feel like it would become difficult for him to not steal a lot of her thunder, if that makes sense. It degrades what is special and particular and unique about her, and the things she can do and what she's aware of and conditioned for. And again, that's very meta and just like a practical story approach answer. It's not like a fun answer because I think the fun answer is like totally, yeah, he totally learned some Moon. But my answer is I don't want him to because it's Rayla's stuff and
Fair enough, yeah.
She gets to stand alone in that territory.
Here's one from Tyler Dashart. She asks, what was it like writing Rayllum scenes in Season 5 knowing the fandom would freak out?
Really hard. We now pay a lot of attention to those moments because we know that people will be waiting for them and want them. We try to be careful with them, kind of deliberate in how they're presented. It's not very helpful, but I'm always like, what are the exact like the one that stands out to me is the very end of Finnegan's Wake where he does the sort of delayed hug.
Yep.
And like I will put in every scene. Anytime I'm allowed to have a character like react slowly to a hug, I will do it because I think it's like just peak drama, and I'm like made of cheese on that. It's just so cheesy and good. That moment was so deliberately laid out in the script, and I was very like,
this will
sort
happen.
of like I was a mean producer about like the pacing of that exact sequence of expressions and physicality. So yeah, we really not to be sloppy with it. I hope it plays that way.
This one comes from Lou. She is she's a British person. I think you know what I'm about to ask you. In Season 4, Rex Igneous tells Ezrin, "I'll try your tart." Lou apparently died of laughter when she first heard this. What was that an intentional joke in British slang?
It wasn't intentional. I don't even know if Ian got it as a intentional or as a accidental kind of like slightly dirty British joke. We're all too American to have known right away. And I guess that's sort of just what happens when you have recurring jelly tarts in your whole show. Apologies to all British. Apologies to all British people for too American to know when we've made a dirty joke. It's Ian's fault because he didn't tell us. He probably knew.
Is there anything spoilery that you think you can tell us about the future seasons that you want to tell us? Anything at all?
Anything spoilery? There's a question in here that we didn't get to about the Aaron has referred to as the skeleton at the bottom of the Sea of the Cast Out. I guess all I'll say is that I have not seen it. Just my cursory perusal of people's theories on it. I haven't seen anybody get it right yet. Thinking,
okay.
I guess that's it. I don't have any other spoilery things. Air emoji, I did that on the Discord. It was after the watch party.
Wait, what'd you say?
Fire emoji, just fire emoji. That's my other spoilery tease. Nobody's been right about the skeleton yet, and fire emoji. Anyway, there's Piper.
All right, is there any last minute things you want to talk about?
Yes, extreme thanks to all the fans, especially on this interview came out of just an interaction on the primary Dragon Prince Discord, so really love that the way our community is set up and handled and moderated and on and so forth that allows this sort of thing to happen organically. Really like talking about the process of writing the show, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do so. So thank you so much for reaching out and setting this up. Obviously, thanks to all the fans for watching and enjoying our silly cartoon about dragons and silly teenagers. So it really means the world to see people react to it with such interesting thoughts and investment, and really cool ideas and really cool takes that even didn't quite intend. But again, art as a medium, it's a conversation. It's our two sides to interpretation of it, and no matter what you do as sort of like a person involved in the creation of it, there will always be parts that there's reach into it and grab that didn't even really put there on purpose, but you're so happy that it exists. It's great. It feels really magical, and I'm like excited about it all the time. So thank you for sharing all your thoughts with me, and thanks to everybody else for all the questions, and thanks for doing the interview.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that was something else, wasn't it? I really hope you guys enjoyed this interview with Devon Giehl. It was a fantastic time. We learned a ton of stuff. The writing process really is something, isn't it? Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to have a chance to ask Devon any other questions for future interviews, be sure to join my Discord server, the Cov Club. That is your best chance to be able to ask questions, and to meet me and a whole bunch of other dedicated Dragon Prince fans. Also, if you guys want to, please follow me on Patreon. You get a ton of awesome rewards, including a rank on the server, your name at the end of videos, and exclusive content. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.